There were some gripes about the Marvel trade paperback reprints of G.I. Joe. Issue number 1 is missing a backup story entitled Hot Potato, for instance. Oddly enough, several reprints of number 1 leave out Hot Potato, even though it's a significant piece of Joe lore. It's the first story to establish that Snake Eyes has feelings for Scarlet. Regardless, seeing even an effort to represent the long-neglected series didn't go unappreciated. So the first issue, June 1982's Joe number 1. Writer Larry Hama, a Marvel editor with drawing chops, frustrated he was never offered freelance writing jobs, begins a legendary run. The Special Missions Force for the 80s. Notice that Snake Eyes is missing from the cover. One of the characters, Stalker, greatly resembles another Hama creation who predates Joe. Before G.I. Joe's 1982 revival, Hama was developing Fury Force, a proposed series featuring the newly introduced son of Nick Fury alongside a squad of elite soldiers, a cast readers wouldn't expect to find in a Marvel superhero series. Years later, in a Joe letter column, Hama would cop to a certain unease with the standard vigilante concept. Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, noting Hama's military experience, tapped him for the G.I. Joe project, prompting Hama to adapt many of his Fury Force concepts for the toy line. Proto-versions of Stalker, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet can be spotted in the Fury Force concept art. Stalker is based on Ed Davis, an artist friend of Hama's who also served in Vietnam. Davis apparently disappeared years later doing mercenary work in South America. The Wolverine character John Wraith, created by Hama, is also based on Davis. Hama has stated that Davis really did wear Wraith's Western ensemble. Who's to say how Davis would have felt about being portrayed by will.i.am on screen? Shortly after his return from Vietnam in the early 1970s, Davis began working at Neil Adams' studio, Continuity Comics, as part of the notorious Krusty Bunkers collective. As Howard Chaykin has recounted, Ed Davis might have been the best. Ed came into Continuity in the early 1970s with a huge briefcase full of sketchbooks. He was a Vietnam vet, fresh out of the service, and every sketchbook had a different theme. The guy was the best natural draftsman I'd ever seen, an incredibly talented guy. He had personal problems. He did a couple of jobs for heavy metal in the early days, and worked on the $6 Million Man in Space, 1999, when Continuity was packaging that material, did 1 or 2 jobs for Warren, but then disappeared. End quote. His final appearances in the comics industry during the early 1980s include contributions to several Marvel publications such as Epic Illustrated and Crazy Magazine. While crafting Stalker's backstory, Hama borrowed heavily from Davis's life, altering the setting of his years leading gangs from New York to Detroit to introduce some regional diversity. Davis was also known for carrying a Magnum revolver. Hama recounted an incident aboard a train where 3 young men taunted Davis about his attire. Davis remained still as the mocking continued, then swiftly flicked a bullet at one of their chests. Davis then commented, "Next one comes at you a lot faster." According to Hama's one-time assistant editor Christopher Priest, Davis was, quote, terrifying. In the first issue, Hama is joined by Herb Trimpe, a skilled journeyman artist who would later acknowledge that Joe, with its intense need for reference and highly detailed character models, was no joy to draw. One aspect of those early issues that deserves attention is the animated commercials commissioned by Hasbro for the series. Decades later, television ads for comics would be just as much a novelty as they were in 1982. Based on the available data, before this commercial for Joe number 1, they simply didn't exist. And it's no secret these comic book ads were toy commercials in disguise. The FCC regulates how many seconds of animation can be used in a toy advertisement, demanding the toy companies actually show the physical product for most of the ad. Someone at Hasbro had a stroke of genius. No one's ever advertised a comic book on TV before. The FCC can't really say anything about a category of advertising that's totally new. No regulations, no worry. And conveniently, the ads for the comic will feature whatever the latest figures and vehicles are on sale. The person who had to study the storyboards and rough cuts of the commercials and then forge a story out of them was, as you've probably guessed, Larry Hama. Likely no one would want to script a comic this way, but Hama's public attitude is to simply declare this a part of his job, taking the brief clips of action amongst random backgrounds and turning them into stories Hama seemed to view more as a challenge than anything. Hama did imply in one of the later Joe letter columns that the comic ads were thankfully over, giving him more freedom with the stories. If he had his way, he would very likely never want to deal with them. That said, these commercials helped the comic and the overall comics industry immensely in the early 1980s. Joe #1 sold out in a few days and became one of the era's hottest collector items.